Captain Lee Minho gripped the control panel as his ship slowly approached the massive planet ahead. This wasn't just any mission. This was humanity's first real chance to make friends with aliens who had been flying between stars for thousands of years. His heart pounded as he stared at the beautiful blue and silver world of the Vythak Empire. The Vythak were nothing like humans had imagined aliens would look like. They were tall and graceful, almost like living light bulbs that could walk and talk. Their skin glowed with soft colors that changed depending on their mood, and instead of arms and legs like humans, they had long, flowing tentacles that moved like underwater plants. When they talked to each other, patterns of light danced across their bodies like a secret language made of rainbows. Minho had studied everything he could about these creatures before this trip. The Vythak had built cities that looked like they were made of giant crystals, and their technology was so advanced it seemed like magic. They could make their machines work just by thinking about it, and their spaceships were alive in ways that human scientists couldn't understand. As Minho's ship landed in the Crystal City, he felt tiny compared to the towering spires around him. Everything sparkled and hummed with energy. The Vythak had prepared a formal welcome ceremony in their largest building, which looked like the inside of a massive diamond. Hundreds of these glowing aliens had gathered to see the strange visitors from a distant world called Earth. Minho wore his best uniform and tried to remember all the diplomatic rules he had learned. He was supposed to wait for the Queen to speak first, bow at the right moment, and never touch any of the aliens without permission. His team of human diplomats stood behind him, all looking nervous but excited. Then something completely unexpected happened. Queen Istra, the most important Vythak in the entire empire, walked straight toward Minho. She was taller than the others and glowed with a pure white light that made her look like a walking star. The other Vythak started making worried clicking sounds with their tentacles. The Queen stopped right in front of Minho and did something that made everyone gasp. She reached out with one of her glowing tentacles and gently touched his hand. The moment their skin met, something incredible happened. All the Vythak technology around them started glowing brighter and making musical sounds. The crystal walls began pulsing with waves of colorful light, and the air itself seemed to shimmer. Minho felt a warm, tingling sensation run up his arm and through his whole body. It wasn't painful, but it was the strangest thing he had ever experienced. He looked into Queen Istra's large, silvery eyes and saw something that surprised him. She looked lonely, like someone who had been waiting for a very long time for something important to happen. The Queen's advisors were clearly upset. They moved closer, their bodies flashing angry red and orange colors. Some of them made sharp clicking noises that Minho's translator couldn't understand. It was obvious they didn't approve of their queen touching what they probably thought was a primitive creature from a backward planet. But Queen Istra ignored them completely. She kept looking at Minho with those ancient, sad eyes, and for a moment he felt like she was trying to tell him something without words. The technology around them continued to pulse and sing, as if the entire city was waking up from a long sleep, just because a human and a Vythak had touched each other. Dr. Park Jaiwon couldn't believe what she was seeing through her scientific instruments. Every time Captain Minho walked through the Vythak city, something amazing happened. Ancient machines that had been silent for centuries suddenly came to life. Forgotten fountains began flowing with glowing water. Old transport tubes started humming with energy, and decorative crystals that had grown dull over the years began shining like new stars. At first, Ji-won thought it might be a coincidence. Maybe the Vythak were just turning on their technology to impress the human visitors. But as she followed Minho around with her equipment, she realized the truth was much more incredible. The machines were responding to him specifically. When other humans walked by, nothing happened. When Minho approached, everything came alive. The most fascinating part was that these weren't just any machines. According to her research, these were artifacts that the Vythak themselves couldn't activate anymore. Some had been broken for so long that the current generation of Vythak had never seen them work. Yet somehow, a human from Earth could make them function just by being nearby. Queen Istra noticed this too, and she began requesting private meetings with Minho. Unlike the formal ceremonies with lots of witnesses, these were quiet conversations in her personal chambers. The Queen's room was beautiful but sad, filled with objects that had once glowed with life but now sat dark and lifeless. During one of these meetings, Queen Aistra shared something that shocked both Minho and Dr. Jiwon. She brought out ancient books made of a crystal-like material that stored information in patterns of light. With the help of translation devices, she showed them prophecies written thousands of years ago by her ancestors. The texts spoke of a time when the Vithak civilization would begin to fade, when their connection to their living technology would weaken. But the prophecies also mentioned hope, the coming of beings called spark-bearers from distant stars who would help restore what was lost. The descriptions of these spark-bearers sounded remarkably like humans. As Queen Aistra explained more about her people's history, a heartbreaking picture emerged. The Vithak hadn't always been the way they were now. Long ago they had been more emotional, more passionate, more connected to the living world around them. Their technology worked because it was truly alive, responding to feelings and thoughts, and the spark of life itself. But over many generations the Vithak had changed. They became more logical, more controlled, more refined. They thought this made them better, more civilized. What they didn't realize was that they were slowly losing the very thing that made their technology work, their connection to raw, uncontrolled life energy. Dr. Jiwon learned that Vithak cities used to be bright and bustling, filled with millions of inhabitants. Now most of their worlds were half empty. Young Vithak were being born less frequently, and when they were born they seemed weaker than their parents. The living machines that had once made their civilization great were shutting down one by one, and no one knew how to fix them. The Queen explained that her people had tried everything. They had built new machines, studied ancient texts, and even searched other worlds for solutions. Nothing worked. Their biotechnology required something they had lost, a wild, unpredictable energy that their refined minds could no longer produce. But when Minho arrived, everything changed. His presence brought that missing spark back to their world. For Gyumwan, machines recognized something in him that they had been waiting for, something that the Vithak themselves could no longer provide. For the first time in centuries, Queen Aistra felt hope that her dying civilization might actually survive. Engineer Kim Dae-ho had always been good at figuring out how things worked, but Vithak technology was unlike anything he had ever seen. While Dr. Park studied the biological aspects of their hosts, Dae-ho focused on understanding their incredible machines. What he discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the dying alien civilization. Using his advanced scanning equipment, Dae-ho realized that Vithak technology didn't run on electricity or fuel like human machines. Instead, it operated on something much more complex, a combination of biological energy and emotional frequencies. The machines were literally alive, and they needed to feel emotions to function properly. It was like having a car that only worked when you were happy, or a computer that shut down when you got sad. The problem was that modern Vithak barely produced these emotional frequencies anymore. Dae-ho's instruments showed that when Vithak interacted with their technology, the energy readings were incredibly weak. Their emotions had become so controlled and refined that the machines could barely sense them. It was like trying to power a generator with a dying battery. But when humans walked near the same machines, Dae-ho's equipment went crazy. Human emotions were wild, unpredictable, and incredibly powerful compared to the Vithak. Even when the humans weren't trying to do anything special, their natural bioelectric fields and emotional energy caused the alien technology to spring to life. The most dramatic example happened when Dae-ho himself got frustrated trying to understand a particularly complex piece of Vithak equipment. As his anger and determination grew stronger, the entire section of the city around him began to glow. Dead streetlights flickered on, abandoned transport systems started humming, and decorative fountains that hadn't worked for decades suddenly burst into life with streams of colorful, glowing water. The Vithak who witnessed this were absolutely amazed. Some of them had never seen that part of their city working in their entire lifetimes. For Dae-ho, it was both exciting and a little scary to realize that his emotions could control an entire alien city block. Queen Aestra began spending more time with the human team, and during one of their conversations, she opened up about the tragic history of her people. She explained that thousands of years ago, the Vithak had been very different. They had been passionate, emotional beings who laughed loudly, cried openly, and felt everything deeply. Their cities had been vibrant and alive because their technology fed off these intense emotions. But as their civilization grew more advanced, the Vithak began to see strong emotions as primitive and embarrassing. They worked to control their feelings, to become more logical and refined. Parents taught their children to suppress their emotions, and over many generations, the Vithak became the calm, controlled beings that humans had met. What they didn't realize was that by removing chaos and passion from their lives, they were slowly killing their own civilization. Their living technology began to starve without the emotional energy it needed. Cities that had once blazed with light grew dim. Machines that had worked for millennia started shutting down forever. Queen Aestra's voice was filled with regret as she explained how her people had traded their vitality for what they thought was sophistication. They had become so afraid of looking primitive that they had forgotten what made them truly alive. Looking at the humans, especially at how Minho's presence could wake up entire sections of the city, Queen Aestra saw something her people had lost. Long ago, humans weren't afraid to feel deeply. They got excited, angry, sad, and joyful without trying to hide it. Their emotions were messy and unpredictable, but they were also incredibly powerful. For the first time in centuries, Queen Aestra began to hope that her dying civilization might learn to feel again. Linguist Choi Hana had always loved solving puzzles, and the ancient Vithak language was the most challenging puzzle she had ever encountered. While her teammates focused on technology and biology, Hana spent her days in the deepest archives of the Vithak libraries, surrounded by crystal tablets that glowed with stored information from thousands of years ago. The Vithak writing system was beautiful, but incredibly complex. Instead of simple letters or symbols, their ancient texts were written in patterns of light that changed meaning depending on how you looked at them. Some words could only be read when you were feeling certain emotions, while others revealed different meanings based on the time of day or the reader's state of mind. Hana had been working for weeks to understand these texts when she made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. Hidden in the oldest prophecies, written by Vithak seers from the dawn of their civilization, were detailed descriptions of events that sounded exactly like what was happening right now. The prophecy spoke of a time called the Great Dimming, when the Vithak would lose their connection to the living light that powered their world. Their cities would grow dark, their people would become fewer, and their ancient wisdom would begin to fade away. But the prophecy also promised hope in the form of visitors from the stars. These visitors were described as the wild species, beings who carried within them the untamed fire of creation. The prophecy said they would come from a world of water and earth, with short lives but burning bright with passion. When the wild species arrived, they would bring with them the key to saving the Vithak from their slow extinction. What made Hana's heart race was how perfectly the prophecy described humans. The ancient text mentioned beings who felt emotions so strongly that their feelings could be seen and measured, who lived brief lives but packed them full of intense experiences, and who possessed a chaotic energy that could awaken sleeping machines. The most important part of the prophecy spoke of a great union between order and chaos, between the refined Vithak and the wild newcomers. It described how these two very different types of beings would learn from each other, creating something new and wonderful that neither could achieve alone. The Vithak would teach patience and wisdom, while the wild species would restore passion and vitality. But as Hana translated more of the ancient texts, she discovered that not all Vithak had welcomed these prophecies. Even thousands of years, ergo there had been those who feared the coming of the wild species, seeing them as a threat to Vithak purity and superiority. This fear still existed today. General Thirak, one of the most powerful military leaders in the Vithak Empire, represented a group of conservative Vithak who viewed humans with deep suspicion and disgust. While Queen Aestra saw humanity as salvation, Thirak saw them as contamination. Hana learned about Thirak's views through overheard conversations and official statements he made to other Vithak leaders. He argued that humans were primitive barbarians who would corrupt Vithak society if they were allowed to stay. He pointed to how human emotions were causing their technology to behave unpredictably, claiming this was dangerous rather than beneficial. Thirak and his followers believed that the Vithak should solve their problems through their own superior intelligence and refinement. They saw the idea of learning from humans as shameful and degrading. To them, accepting help from such an obviously inferior species would be like admitting that thousands of years of Vithak evolution had been a mistake. What worried Hana most was that Thirak wasn't just complaining, he was planning action. Through careful eavesdropping and translation work, she discovered that the general was organizing a secret group of like-minded Vithak who wanted to eliminate the human delegation before their influence could spread any further. Thirak's plan was simple but terrifying. He would arrange for the humans to have an accident that would look natural but would effectively end any chance of cooperation between the two species. He convinced his followers that this was necessary to preserve Vithak genetic and cultural purity. Hana realized she had to warn Captain Minho and the others, but she also knew that revealing Thirak's plot might destroy any chance of the peaceful cooperation that the ancient prophecies promised. The attack came in the middle of the night when most of the human team was sleeping. Choi Hana had tried to warn everyone about General Thirak's plans, but even she hadn't expected him to move so quickly. The first sign of trouble was when the lights in their guest quarters suddenly went out, plunging everything into complete darkness. Captain Minho woke up to the sound of his team members shouting in confusion. Through the windows, he could see Vithak soldiers surrounding their building. These weren't the friendly, glowing Vithak they had been working with. These soldiers had dimmed their natural light and moved like shadows in the night. Thirak's forces had brought weapons that fired concentrated energy beams designed to disable the living technology that protected the human quarters. The building's defensive systems, which had been working perfectly thanks to human presence, began failing one by one as the attackers systematically destroyed them. Dr. Park Ji-won and engineer Kim Dae-ho tried to barricade the doors while Hana attempted to send a distress signal to Queen Astra. But Thirak had planned carefully. He had cut off all communication systems and surrounded the building with soldiers who were loyal only to him. Just when it seemed like the humans were trapped, with no way out, something unexpected happened. Queen Astra appeared, glowing brighter than Minho had ever seen her. She hadn't come alone, she had brought her own loyal guards, and was clearly furious about what Thirak was doing. The queen moved with incredible speed and grace, her tentacles crackling with energy as she confronted the rebel soldiers. She commanded them to stop in the ancient language of her people, her voice carrying the authority of thousands of years of royal lineage. Some of Thirak's soldiers hesitated, clearly, torn between their loyalty to their general and their respect for their queen. But Thirak himself had no such hesitation. He appeared from the shadows carrying a weapon that Minho had never seen before, something that looked like it was made of living crystal and pulsed with deadly energy. The general's body blazed with angry red light as he aimed the weapon directly at Captain Minho. What happened next would be remembered in both human and Vithak history forever. As Thirak fired his weapon, Queen Astra threw herself between the energy beam and Minho. The blast hit her directly in the chest, and she collapsed to the ground with a cry of pain that made the crystal walls of the building shake. Minho dropped to his knees beside the fallen queen, not caring about the battle still raging around them. Astra's natural glow was fading rapidly, and he could see that the weapon had damaged something vital inside her. She was dying, and there was nothing human medicine could do to help her. But Queen Astra had one last idea. With her remaining strength, she reached out and grabbed Minho's hand, just like she had done during their first meeting. This time, however, instead of just touching him, she used her dying energy to create a biolink, a direct connection between their minds and bodies that had never been attempted between different species before. The moment their minds connected, both Minho and Astra gasped as an incredible flood of experiences washed over them. Minho suddenly felt what it was like to live for thousands of years, to watch civilizations rise and fall, to carry the wisdom and sadness of an entire dying species. He experienced the Queen's loneliness, her desperate love for her people, and her hope that humanity might save them. At the same time, Queen Aistra felt something she had never experienced before, the intense, burning passion of human emotion. She felt Minho's love for his family back on Earth, his excitement about exploring the stars, his determination to help her people, and his fear of dying so far from home. The raw intensity of human feelings was almost overwhelming, but it was also incredibly beautiful. As their minds merged, something amazing began to happen around them. The dying sections of the city that had been dark for centuries suddenly blazed with new life. The biolink between human and Vithak was creating a type of energy that neither species had ever produced alone. Dr. Park Jiwon had seen many incredible things during her career as a scientist, but nothing had prepared her for what she witnessed. After the biolink formed between Captain Minho and Queen Aistra, using every piece of medical and scientific equipment she could find, Jiwon began studying the unprecedented connection between human and Vithak minds. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The biolink wasn't just a simple mental connection, it had created something entirely new. Minho's human consciousness and Aistra's Vithak awareness had merged into a hybrid form of thinking that was more powerful than either species had ever achieved alone. It was like watching two different types of music combined to create a completely new symphony. The most amazing part was how this new hybrid consciousness affected everything around them. Minho and Aistra didn't even have to try to control Vithak technology anymore. It simply responded to their merged thoughts automatically. When they wanted light, the crystals glowed. When they needed transportation, the living vehicles came to them. When they felt hungry, food-growing machines that had been broken for decades suddenly started working again, but the effects weren't limited to just the city where they were staying. Dr. Jiwon's long-range sensors began picking up incredible readings from across the entire Vithak Empire. On planets thousands of light-years away, ancient machines were waking up for the first time in centuries. Dead cities were coming back to life, and Vithak, who had never seen their technology work properly, were watching in amazement as their world transformed around them. The signal created by Minho and Aistra's connection was somehow traveling faster than light itself, carried through the living network that connected all Vithak biotechnology across the galaxy. It was like their merged consciousness had become a wake-up call that reached every corner of the Vithak Empire at once. Engineer Kim Dae-ho worked alongside Dr. Jiwon to understand what was happening. He discovered that the hybrid consciousness was perfectly balanced. It combined human creativity and passion with Vithak wisdom and patience. Where humans were sometimes too impulsive, the Vithak elements provided calm guidance. Where the Vithak had become too controlled, the human elements added spontaneity and life. But as exciting as these discoveries were, Dr. Jiwon soon realized they had a serious problem. The biolink was incredibly unstable. Minho and Aistra were losing themselves in each other's minds, and their individual personalities were starting to blur together. Sometimes Minho would speak with Aistra's ancient wisdom, using words and ideas that no human should know. Other times Aistra would react with purely human emotions, laughing or crying in ways that shocked the other Vithak. The worst part was that they seemed to be losing control over when the connection was active, and when it wasn't. In the beginning, they could choose to link their minds or separate them, but as days passed, the boundary between Minho's thoughts and Aistra's thoughts became harder and harder to maintain. Dr. Jiwon watched with growing concern as her captain struggled to remember details about his life on Earth. He would try to tell stories about his family, but halfway through, he would start mixing in memories that belonged to Queen Aistra from hundreds of years ago. Similarly, Aistra would begin speaking about Vithak history, but would suddenly include details about human culture that she had never learned. The situation became even more complicated when both of them started experiencing physical changes. Minho's eyes began to develop a faint glow similar to Vithak bioluminescence, while Aistra's naturally flowing movements became more rigid and purposeful, like human body language. Linguist Choi Hana tried to help by researching whether anything like this had ever happened before in Vithak history. What she found in the ancient texts was both hopeful and frightening. The prophecies mentioned that the union between species would require great sacrifice, and that those who bridged the gap between worlds might have to give up part of themselves to save both civilizations. Dr. Jiwon realized they were racing against time. The longer the unstable biolink continued, the more likely it became that both Minho and Aistra would lose their individual identities completely. They might save both of their species, but they could end up becoming something entirely different. In the process, neither fully human nor fully Vithak, but something new and unknown. Engineer Kim Dae-ho knew they had to act fast to save both Captain Minho and Queen Aistra from losing themselves completely in their unstable biolink. Working around the clock with a team of brilliant Vithak scientists, Dae-ho began developing something that had never been attempted before, a controlled interface that would allow humans and Vithak to share consciousness safely. The breakthrough came when Dae-ho realized that the problem wasn't the connection itself, but the lack of control over it. Like a river that could either provide life-giving water or destructive floods, the biolink needed proper channels and barriers to make it safe and useful. Using a combination of human technology and Vithak bioengineering, they created what they called symbiotic interfaces, living devices that looked like beautiful crystalline bracelets. These interfaces could regulate the flow of consciousness between species, allowing partners to share thoughts and experiences without losing their individual identities. The first test was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Dae-ho needed volunteers who were willing to risk their minds and possibly their lives to test the new technology. To everyone's surprise, linguist Choi Hana immediately stepped forward, along with several brave Vithak scientists who had been inspired by watching Minho and Aistra's connection revitalize their dying world. Hana was paired with a young Vithak researcher named Kithara, who had spent her life studying the ancient texts that Hana had been translating. When they activated their symbiotic interfaces for the first time, both beings gasped as their minds gently touched each other's thoughts. Unlike the overwhelming flood that Minho and Aistra had experienced, this connection was smooth and controlled. Hana could feel Kithara's memories and knowledge flowing into her mind like a gentle stream, while her own human experiences shared themselves with her Vithak partner. They could choose how much to share and when to maintain their privacy. The results were incredible. Within hours, Hana and Kithara had solved translation problems that had puzzled scholars for years. Hana's human intuition combined with Kithara's vast knowledge created insights that neither could have achieved alone. They could read ancient Vithak texts that had been considered impossible to understand, unlocking secrets that had been lost for millennia. But the benefits went far beyond just intellectual achievements. Dr. Park Ji-won discovered that the bonded pairs were developing enhanced physical abilities as well. Hana's lifespan was extending beyond normal human limits thanks to Vithak cellular regeneration techniques that her body was learning to copy. Meanwhile, Kithara was experiencing emotions and creative impulses that were completely new to her species. The most amazing discovery was that bonded pairs could communicate directly with Vithak biotechnology in ways that even pure Vithak could no longer achieve. When Hana and Kithara worked together, they could wake up machines that had been dormant for centuries, grow new living buildings, and even heal damaged biotechnology that other Vithak had considered beyond repair. Word of these successful partnerships spread quickly throughout the Vithak Empire. For the first time in generations, young Vithak began to feel hope about their future. The symbiotic interfaces offered them a chance not just to survive, but to grow beyond what their species had ever been before. More human volunteers arrived from Earth, excited by the reports of successful consciousness sharing. Engineers, doctors, artists, and teachers all wanted to experience the incredible possibilities that came from bonding with Vithak partners. Each pairing created unique combinations of abilities and insights. The most surprising result was something that no one had expected. The bonded pairs began having children. These weren't traditional biological offspring, but new forms of consciousness that were born from the merged creativity of human and Vithak minds. These mind children existed as living programs within the biotechnology network, capable of independent thought and growth. For the first time in over 300 years, the Vithak Empire's population began to increase instead of decline. The dying civilization had found a way not just to survive, but to evolve into something entirely new and wonderful. Engineer Deho watched with pride as his stable bio-interfaces allowed dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of successful human-Vithak partnerships to form across the galaxy. Each bonded pair added their unique strengths to the growing network of hybrid consciousness that was transforming both civilizations. The symbiotic evolution had begun, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. As the symbiotic bonding became safer and more reliable, something beautiful began happening that no one had fully expected. Entire human families started making the incredible decision to leave Earth behind and build new lives on Vithak worlds. At the same time, curious Vithak explorers traveled to Earth for the first time in their species' history, eager to experience the chaotic, vibrant world that had produced such passionate beings. Engineer Kim Dae-ho found himself at the center of this massive transformation. What had started as a simple diplomatic mission had become the greatest migration in human history. Families who had never imagined living anywhere but Earth were packing up their belongings and traveling across the galaxy to start fresh lives. Among the crystal cities of the Vithak Empire, the Lee family was among the first to make the move. When Captain Minho's younger brother, Jinwoo, heard about the incredible opportunities on Vithak worlds, he convinced his wife and 2 young children to join the adventure. Like many human families, they were attracted by the promise of extended lifespans, enhanced abilities, and the chance to be part of something completely new. But integrating 2 such different species wasn't easy. Humans needed oxygen to breathe, while Vithak thrived in atmospheres rich in exotic gases. Humans ate solid food, while Vithak absorbed nutrients directly from their environment. Human children played rough games and made lots of noise, while young Vithak preferred quiet, meditative activities. Dae-ho realized they needed to create entirely new types of communities, places where both species could live comfortably together. Working with both human architects and Vithak bioengineers, he began designing the first mixed colonies. These weren't just buildings, but living ecosystems that could adapt to the needs of whoever was living in them. The first colony, called New Sol Vith, was built on a beautiful Vithak world with purple skies and floating crystal formations. The buildings were grown rather than constructed, using Vithak biotechnology that could sense what its inhabitants needed and adjust accordingly. When humans entered a room, the atmosphere would shift to provide more oxygen. When Vithak needed rest, the walls would dim and emit calming frequencies. The most amazing part was watching the children adapt. Human kids and young Vithak, who had no preconceived ideas about how different they were supposed to be, became friends almost instantly. 7-year-old Min-jae Lee was fascinated by his Vithak playmate Xylan's ability to glow different colors, while Xylan was amazed by how Min-jae could run and jump with such energy. These mixed groups of children began developing capabilities that surprised even the scientists studying them. They could communicate without words, sharing thoughts and feelings through a natural form of bio-linking that developed on its own. They solved problems by combining human creativity with Vithak patience, and they played games that required both physical agility and mental harmony. Dr. Park Ji-won, who had relocated to study the colony's development, discovered that the hybrid consciousness network was growing stronger every day. Bonded pairs across the galaxy were sharing their knowledge and experiences, creating a vast library of combined human Vithak wisdom that anyone in the network could access. This shared consciousness began solving problems that had puzzled both species for generations. Human diseases that had no cure were healed using Vithak bioregeneration techniques. Vithak technology that had been failing for centuries was repaired using human engineering principles. Environmental problems on both Earth and Vithak worlds were addressed using combined approaches that neither species could have developed alone. The most exciting breakthrough came when the network discovered how to create sustainable faster-than-light travel. By combining human mechanical engineering with Vithak biotechnology, they developed living spaceships that could think and adapt during long journeys. These ships didn't just carry passengers, they became temporary homes where human and Vithak crew members could bond and share experiences during their travels. Linguist Choi Hana, now permanently bonded with her Vithak partner Kithara, established the first intergalactic communication system. Using their combined understanding of language and consciousness, they created a way for the growing hybrid network to stay connected across vast distances. Families separated by light years could share thoughts and feelings as easily as if they were in the same room. The integration wasn't without challenges, but every problem became an opportunity for both species to learn and grow together. 5. Years had passed since that fateful night when Queen Astra threw herself in front of General Thyrak's weapon to save Captain Minho's life. Now standing together in the beautiful gardens of New Sol Vith, they had become something that neither human nor Vithak had ever imagined possible. Two beings sharing one enhanced consciousness while still maintaining their individual personalities and memories. Minho could still remember his childhood on Earth, his family's small apartment in Seoul, and the dreams that had driven him to become a space explorer. But now those memories were enriched by Astra's ancient wisdom and her deep understanding of the cosmos. Similarly, Astra retained all her millennia of experience and royal knowledge, but it was now colored by Minho's human passion and his fierce love for life. Their successful bonding had become the template that made all other human-Vithak partnerships possible. Dr. Park Ji-won and engineer Kim Dae-ho had studied their connection for years, using it to perfect the symbiotic interfaces that now allowed thousands of beings from both species to share consciousness safely. The gardens where they stood were a perfect example of what their two species could create together. The plants weren't entirely Earth-based or purely Vithak. They were new hybrid organisms that combined the best of both worlds. Flowers that glowed with bioluminescent beauty grew alongside earth roses that filled the air with familiar scents. Trees that could change color with the seasons stood next to Vithak crystal formations that sang gentle melodies in the wind. But what brought the greatest joy to both Minho and Astra were the children playing in the gardens around them. Human kids and young Vithak had grown up together, creating friendships that transcended species differences. When they laughed together, something magical happened. Their combined emotions were so pure and powerful that they created visible patterns of light in the air, like living rainbows that danced above their heads. 8-year-old Soyoung Park, Dr. Ji-won's daughter, was teaching her Vithak friend Zephyr how to play hide-and-seek among the crystal formations. Meanwhile, 10-year-old Vithak youngster Lumina was showing human boy Tai-hyun how to make the garden flowers glow brighter just by touching them gently. These children didn't see each other as different species. They were simply friends who happened to have different abilities. The transformation hadn't stopped with just one colony. Across the galaxy, hundreds of mixed communities were thriving. Earth itself had welcomed Vithak visitors who helped heal environmental damage that humans had struggled with for decades. Polluted oceans were cleaned using Vithak bioremediation techniques, while dying forests were restored with the help of living technology that could accelerate natural growth. On Vithak worlds, human engineers had helped rebuild cities that had been failing for centuries. The combination of human mechanical knowledge and Vithak biotechnology created urban environments that were more beautiful and efficient than either species had ever achieved alone. Minho and Astra's joined consciousness served as the central hub for a vast network that now connected millions of bonded beings across dozens of worlds. Through this network, knowledge and wisdom flowed freely between all members. A human farmer on Earth could instantly access the agricultural wisdom of Vithak bioengineers, while a Vithak artist could draw inspiration from human creativity and emotional expression. The network had also solved many of the practical problems that had once seemed impossible. Faster-than-light communication allowed families separated by vast distances to stay connected. Medical knowledge shared between species had eliminated most diseases that had plagued both civilizations. Even death had become less final, as consciousness could be preserved and shared within the network, allowing loved ones to remain connected even after their physical bodies failed. General Thirak, who had once tried to destroy the human delegation, had eventually joined the network himself after witnessing the incredible benefits it brought to his people. His rigid beliefs about species purity had melted away when he experienced firsthand the joy and wisdom that came from true cooperation. Standing in their garden paradise, Minho and Astra watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that existed nowhere else in the universe. A perfect blend of Earth's warm oranges and reds with the cool blues and purples of Vithak worlds. They had not only saved the Vithak from extinction, but had given humanity a gift beyond imagination, the chance to become something greater than they had ever dreamed possible. Retriclord can make mistakes,